The poll comes from TransUnion, which surveyed 1,000 adult consumers in the country, and it showed Canadians are feeling less optimistic about their finances. 57% said their incomes are not keeping up with the current inflation rate.
Now, a warning from the National Housing Agency. Canadian households have the highest debt levels in the G7. If a recession or other unexpected crisis takes hold, the CMHC says families and the entire economy will be more vulnerable.
Most of the expenses that I have are basically the basics or the necessities of like mortgage, groceries, property taxes, insurances.
It's a little surprised what's going on here. You know, many are leaning on their credit cards more and more as everyday expenses rise. Right. You know, the salaries haven't kept up with the cost of living, Fliza, and you got to make it up sometimes with the credit card.
When I first started in this industry 23 years ago, the average household was only spending about 30% of their income on housing costs. Now it's more like 60 to 70%. And when you factor in things like a vehicle loan, debt repayments, groceries, there just isn't anything left. And so that's why debt starts to accumulate, because in order to make up the difference, we're putting those extras on credit cards. And the stigma around bankruptcies and consumer proposals, and the reason why people don't come to see us, is they believe that, you know, they're going to be perceived that they were living high on the hog. Do you know what I mean? And it's a result of overspending, and that's not the case. For the majority of people that walk through their doors, through our doors, basically what we're seeing is they've been using credit to float their living expenses, to cover the groceries, to cover those extras, to cover the costs of their children's activities, because there just isn't that room in the budget in order to make those things happen.
I mean, it's been interesting to see what things have, how it's evolved over the past couple of years. Also, it's been interesting just to kind of compare other moments in the recent history over the past kind of 20 years. So, you know, I'm a millennial, so I was very much in the thick of the Great Recession. And then, you know, we dealt with COVID and this kind of a crisis. For me, it's, and I think a lot of people, Gen Z and millennials, were a little disillusioned because it feels like it's always been expensive and it just keeps on getting more expensive. There's never been a moment where it's gotten less expensive or it's staying put because it's so brief. And so I think there's definitely a lot of disillusionment. A lot of people are kind of, I think, losing hope, especially, you know, it's sad to hear younger people, especially say, I don't think I'll ever own a condo, a home in any way in my lifetime, when we were brought up in, you know, these great homes that had, you know, lots of space and like a front backyard. And then we realized, I don't think I'll ever be able to achieve that in my lifetime, no matter, you know, how hard I studied in university, how many degrees I have, how well I do in my career. That just may not be a possibility for me.
Canadians are in debt like never before, with headlines reading Canadian households now the third most indebted in the world. Households in the 3 lowest income quintiles now have a higher debt ratio than before the pandemic, and real disposable income has declined for all but the richest Canadians. The debt surge put Canadian households on the world map for all the wrong reasons. Now what? How do we get back on track? Is it a simple fix or something harder to solve?
You actually have 2 levers that you can pull. You can either increase your income or decrease your expenses. So really, those are the 2 things that you need to pull from. So we look at both. We look at what are the income generating activities that can happen in order to make ends meet. Can you bring in a renter? You know, is that an option? Is there an opportunity for some self-employment or some extra employment? Many people during the COVID period decided that they were going to reduce their hours at work. Because, you know, there was a lifestyle change. We want to be, you know, spending more time at home. We want to be, you know, so there's a whole effort around self-care and minimizing. For the average family, that's not a reality. And even though we want to aspire to that, just from affordability, especially in this region, having 2 full-time working parents is usually required if you have a family at home. And so it's looking at those decisions and asking, you know, what is it that you're actually looking for in terms from a goal and values perspective. And the reality as well is, you know, before we used to talk about sometimes you need to curb your coffee spending, and we used to use that example. Well, sometimes that's not even moving the needle anymore. And so for some individuals that I'm meeting with, it's, do we need to make a bigger or different decision? Like, where are you living? You know, is it time that we either downsize, or are we moving to a city or town that's a little outside of the region, but still allows you to commute to reduce your expenses? A lot of the individuals are making those hard choices because it's just not affordable to stay in this region.
That's where we're starting to see the squeeze of the first-time home buyer. It's very difficult, and a lot of these first-time home buyers have worked really hard to save up their $75,000, $100,000 down payment. But the problem is that starter home that we may have grown up thinking is a starter home isn't available, because those are now forever homes to some folks. So now the homes that are available are now $800,000-$900,000. And that down payment isn't going to be enough to get them that home. And so that's kind of where we're moving to a lot of the strategies involving where we can get money from the parents or the grandparents in a way that is gifted, and as well as is tax efficient for everyone. That's kind of one of the main ways to get the first-time home buyers in. Or the other way is we're seeing a lot of the local first-time home buyers moving to completely different areas. We're seeing go really far north. For us, moving north used to be Owen Sound. Now north is heading up to Sault Ste. Marie and finding areas is that way. So we're seeing that first-time home buyer having to make real hard decisions, especially when they're still trying to scrimp and save, which is difficult to see. But we are seeing some success with some of those folks who are willing to hold out and find that right home.
I'd say compared to, say, you know, our parents' generation, baby boomers, is the fact that incomes have not kept pace with all of these rising costs. It is kind of wild to think my parents, you know, made very little and they were able to buy a home in their early 20s. And that's something that it's just, when I think about that, it's great. And I think they may have been on one income. And so there's so many things that just aren't possible. You know, if you want to be a stay-at-home parent, can you afford to do that? Like, sometimes it actually doesn't make financial sense to do that. It makes more sense for both parents to work and put your kid in daycare. That's cheaper sometimes. So I think there's just so many differences how we grew up, and then we're realizing, oh, I can't do that. I have to do something different. But I think, yeah, the biggest factor is our incomes have not increased. What I was earning in my early 20s, I still see those types of wages for similar jobs 15 years later. And that's kind of scary, because I'm like, I was barely able to afford my rent and my groceries and all those things and put something away into my RRSP. How on earth is anyone doing that in this day and age when rent is like $2,000, $3,000 a month? I was paying like $500 a month. It's kind of wild.
It's really hard to understand some of these larger economic factors. What you see is your own budget, you know, and how's your income looking and what are your expenses looking like. And that's obviously a place where, you know, I can understand people are legitimately angry about working hard and not being able to make ends meet. It's a lot easier to get angry at, like, a given price hike in the supermarket or something like that, than it is to think about, you know, how did we all get into a situation where, you know, this is not just my own experience, but broadly speaking, it's happening to a lot of people, especially at the lower end of the income distribution. My hunch is that, many decades past, there were a lot of people who were relying on paychecks to pay their bills. That was considered, a noble and important social function to be reporting into work every day. And in a sense that, it was obvious that there was a social priority to making sure that people could live decently when they had, full-time work. But in any case, many decades past that, there has been a whole ensemble of changes that have made work more precarious. People's ties to their employers are more fragile. They may feel like, they're not as respected for what they do. I mean, there could be a million things, including the depiction that, in a sense, we're fascinated by the, the wealthy or the elite business leaders or what have you, but we pay a lot less attention to like all of the army of people that make all these good things possible as well. So, in a sense, it feels to me like there might be a little less attention and even compassion about people who are, still showing up for work, but are having a harder time making a go of it.
According to a 2023 report by Statistics Canada, inflation reached a 40-year high in 2022 and affected Canadians' ability to meet day-to-day expenses. Negative supply shock fueled the problem, but greedflation in the oil and gas sector also played a significant role. The report noted that it's unclear to what extent increases in costs attributed to labor shortages or supply chain pressures or increased demand were passed on to the consumers or absorbed by businesses.
Well, one thing that occurs to me is that as somebody who's been interested in wage growth in Canada for quite a while, from a household budget perspective, one of the obvious solutions of if you can't afford, your mortgage, your grocery bills, or what have you, you may want a higher salary. So perhaps you're in a position to demand, that you get a raise. But that is a potential increase in cost to businesses. So the Bank of Canada and others who are looking at this problem may have concerns that wage increases, while they help the people who get them, may also add to the costs and therefore, create other affordability squeezes. I want to issue a note of caution about this. Yeah, there are scenarios where what I've just outlined could happen. But there's a kind of strange discrepancy in that analysis, which says, wage increases are problematic from a point of view of inflation, but what about profit increases? We don't appear to have so much discussion when reports come in that profits have increased, say in grocery stores or other places. And I think that's a problem. I think we need to look at this even-handedly and say, we don't want to just, in a sense, blame the workers who are having this affordability crisis when they try and solve it by hoping for higher wages, and yet never have a comparable focus on profits.
Locally, some employers have found a way to offer more competitive compensation.
The living wage is the hourly wage that a worker needs to earn to cover not just their basic expenses, but to have a little bit extra to participate in community. And so in Ontario, there's been a number of local groups that have been working on the living wage for many years. I myself started in Waterloo Region back in 2014, and a lot of the work that we did here in our community rolled into the Ontario Living Wage Network. So when we first started, there were a handful of communities with living wage calculations that were maybe considering living wage certification programs to recognize employers. But we've grown a lot since then. And so at this point, the Ontario Living Wage Network now has living wage calculations that cover the province. And we recognize more than 640 certified living wage employers across the province. There are 10 different economic regions that we've broken the province down into, and so we have a living wage rate for each of those regions. Here in Waterloo region, we're part of an economic region for Dufferin, Guelph, Wellington, and Waterloo, and the current living wage rate here is $20.90 an hour. But the living wage rate does vary across the province, so unsurprisingly, the highest living wage rate in Ontario is in the Greater Toronto area, and that rate is right now $25.05 an hour.
It makes sense, especially during this time where we're in an affordability crisis. There's, people aren't being able to pay their rent. Housing prices have gone through the roof. So, being able to pay my staff a little bit more, that they know that they're going to be able to buy groceries or whatever it might be. Some other things that we've done just over the last couple of years to even pump things up a little bit more for everybody is we are part of the Better Way Alliance of Ethical Employers. And being part of the Better Way Alliance means that we also do paid sick days. We actually work individually with each of our staff around their scheduling so that it fits with their lives. Oh, wow. Yeah, as much as possible. Yeah. It's, we are kind of a 24/7 business. If people need us to drop things off at 2 in the morning, we have been known to do that. So it's just making sure that it works with our staff's lives.
I think there really is a business case for the living wage. Employers in our certification program have consistently told us that when they pay a living wage, they're better able to attract new talent. They have higher retention rates. So employees are happier, they want to stay with that employer for longer. There's a real savings there on hiring and training new employees, both in time and in money. And I think employers are finding that because their employees are sticking around for longer, they really know the work that they're doing. They become more productive and better ambassadors for that workplace.
As businesses still try to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, inflation has created its own set of challenges for small business employers.
I think the rise in the interest rates, as unwelcome as they weren't a surprise to anyone. Right. I think everyone, I don't know if they anticipated, but I think certainly the interest rate increases were forecasted. And I think a lot of businesses were prepared for them. Were they helpful? No, they weren't. Because essentially what you're looking at with the rise in interest rates, people were paying more in interest. And I think what was particularly challenging for a lot of businesses was a lot of them borrowed heavily. Right. During those first couple of months or first few years of the pandemic. They were borrowing just to keep people on the payroll. They were borrowing just to keep their businesses operational and liquid. Mm-hmm. So, they borrowed the money 4 years ago, and then all of a sudden there was a rise in interest rates. So there was additional cost for them that they had to manage. So, I think, the interest rate, as unwelcome as it was, I don't think it was unforeseen, but certainly it's been a challenge it's an added challenge with every other challenge. Right. That, I think your average business has been contending with for the last 4 years. We've always had challenges getting the talent here that is required by employers. Mm-hmm. I often use the example, you go back 40 years ago, for example, there were, when I was in university, and that goes back a few years, but when I was in university, you had major employers would come to Laurier and they'd come to University of Waterloo. Take, for example, the petrochemical industry over in Sarnia. Mm-hmm. They always used to come to the University of Waterloo and recruit chemical engineers. Mm-hmm. And, they'd come to the University of Waterloo, and if they couldn't get everybody they wanted, then they go to Western, they go to Toronto, and they go to other schools that had chemical engineering programs. And, a lot of the employers at that point in time could get the talent they needed domestically. Right. Well, with a lot of our employers, and you get into, probably Research in Motion, Christie Digital, mm-hmm. A lot of the larger technology companies found out that they couldn't get or they couldn't source a lot of their employment requirements domestically, so they had to go to global talent markets. So, you know, from that perspective, we've always had challenges with respect to, securing qualified employees. And, you know, for a lot of our technology companies, the pool of talent is somewhat limited. Right. You know, that's why they've had to go beyond, domestic borders and into international talent markets. So, you know, you've always had that challenge, but, you know, I mean, small businesses, again, the hospitality sector, what happened was where a lot of people were laid off 4 years ago at the start of the pandemic. And they had to leave their jobs and they had to find something else. They had to find another source of income, so they went, you know, somewhere else. So then, you know, when their previous employers started opening up again, some of them didn't go back.
That's right.
You know, so there's always been that kind of constraint on a lot of the sectors in terms of securing talent. But we're seeing, you know, gradually, I think it's starting to pick up. Again, you know, we're a growing community, so, you know, we hopefully have the talent coming in.
Right.
Either domestically or from the international markets. We always have talent coming into the community. So it's just a matter of trying to match the employees with the employers.
Some of those hardest hit by the affordability crisis are people who rely on social services to make ends meet. Just as employee wages haven't kept pace with inflation, neither have rates for Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Support Program.
No clawbacks! No clawbacks! No clawbacks!
For years now, people on ODSP, Ontario's Disability Support Program, have been warning they don't make enough to survive. A recent report from the Jalybread Food Bank found they have an average of $6.60 left after rent and utilities.
Locally, Acorn Canada is calling on the provincial government to reform its Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support programs.
Raising the rates by at least doubling them and then tying them to inflation thereafter. Stopping clawbacks that happen when you get married to both benefits and income. Stopping the downloading of responsibility from the province to the municipalities, as well as stopping the new model that they claim is like towards human services, but really is just uploading things to the internet, which is ridiculous because a lot of people don't have access to good internet, as well as the model of trying to get people to work, even though the reason most people are on ODSP is because they can't work.
ODSP rates for people with disabilities became an election issue on the campaign trail. The Green Party and the NDP promised to double it. The Liberals said they would increase it by 20%. Initially, the PCs were not going to raise it at all and then promised to increase it by 5%. That's a monthly increase of just $58.
People on ODSP and OW have overwhelming rates of poverty and housing insecurity, and are the main users of the food bank, which is already overwhelmed. I am on ODSP, so it affects me personally, but it's just wild that we continually cast aside such vulnerable members of society, and it's disheartening to say the least.
So we also provide employment services through Employment Ontario. And what we're seeing there is a number of people coming through our services looking for work, trying to ensure that they're finding jobs that are good for them, that are helping them find stable, secure work. And we're seeing a fairly steady number of people coming through, looking for help, looking for work on resumes and cover letters, job search assistance, being able to, help them and coach them through those processes, ensuring they have everything in place to be successful in moving forward. I think that people are really looking at their situation each individually. And I think that, when you think about, again, minimum wage, and you think about our living wage in this area, I think it's $21, I believe, just over $21. You're taking a minimum wage job, you're going to have to look for another another job. Because again, with the cost of food, the cost of housing, to be able to kind of make ends meet every month, you've got to find, you've got to find the income to be able to do that. So it is challenging for sure. Our hope is, again, to provide people with support to be able to, guide them into jobs that, maybe starting at a lower wage, but also think about that career path and how can we help you move forward in a career that will actually help financially and help you be able to kind of move into a situation that might be a little bit easier for you.
I think that because we've seen such a lot of inflation, there has been a change and more of a recognition around wages. There's a recognition that people need to earn more to be able to cover their expenses. And, one of the reasons I would say that people have been reaching out to look into living wage certification over the last couple of years is to, one, try and make themselves stand out in the labor market. So really trying to attract talent, because that has been difficult for people. But I think too, it's sort of this almost badge of honor and this symbol that, this is why our costs are the way they are. We want to make sure that we are taking care of our employees. And so they're looking to use the living wage certification to try and help make the case for their customers as to why they, they're charging the amount that they're charging.
Okay. I think part of the problem is, again, that disillusionment. If you feel like, well, what's even the point of paying down my debt because I'm never going to, save up enough to retire or to own a home, why even bother? And so I think that's a big issue, is really having that kind of lack of hope that things could improve. And also too, because there's so many people in Gen Z and Gen Y that are going through this, it kind of feels normal. So many people are living with debt, whether that's consumer debt or student debt. And so it's almost kind of like, well, everyone has debt. So why am I going to take all these extra strides to, live really frugally or work a second job just so I can pay off that debt? Like, what's kind of the point? And so that's definitely a big thing that I've been seeing, is this kind of lack of hope and motivation, because it feels like no matter how hard you work, it's never good enough. I think what's really important is the two really big things that I did that I'm so glad I did was I spent time educating myself. No one in my friend group or even my family were talking about personal finance or investing. But I knew just from like how much I was, money coming in, going out, I'm like, I need to figure this out, because I can't live paycheck to paycheck like this. And so for me, it was reading books and then blogs, and then that kind of, ushered me into this new career. But it made me realize there's a lot of voices out there, and there's a lot of great information. A lot of it, is available for free or at the library. You can educate yourself. That will honestly help kind of quell some of your financial anxieties and build your confidence and give you hope. And I guess the other element is, don't count yourself out. I think a lot of people don't even try because they think they can't afford it. They're not smart enough. They're, they just, I wasn't born with wealth, so I'll never be able to accumulate wealth with all these different factors. And, although there's lots of things that are more difficult now than they were 20, 30 years ago, I believe that there's always a silver lining. There's always something that you can do to improve your financial situation if you kind of take the initiative. And, don't give up, because that's not really a good alternative, giving up and just being in debt forever and then never being able to retire. Like, no one wants to do that. So we've got to look for some solutions outside of that.